The call that changed everything. Billionaire Christopher Bennett had it all, until a desperate phone call from a child claiming to be his son shattered his world. Forced to confront the past he left behind, Christopher finds himself facing a choice that money can't fix. Will he step up or walk away again? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Christopher Bennett loosened his tie as he settled into his leather office chair. He'd just closed another multi-million-dollar deal, and the champagne was waiting in his penthouse refrigerator. At 45, Christopher had everything money could buy: a luxury apartment in the heart of the city, a sports car collection, and a reputation as one of the most successful investment bankers in the country. "Mr. Bennett, is there anything else you need before I leave?" asked his assistant from the doorway. "No, thank you, Melissa. Have a good weekend," Christopher replied, barely looking up from the contracts spread across his desk. Melissa nodded and left. The office fell silent except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional honk from the traffic below. Christopher liked it this way: ordered, controlled, predictable. His cell phone rang, breaking the silence. He frowned. At the unknown number, but answered anyway. It could be a potential client, Christopher Bennett speaking. There was silence, then a small, trembling voice came through. "Daddy, we are starving." Christopher's hand froze on the phone. "Excuse me, who is this?" It's Max," the tiny voice continued. "Mommy said to call you. She said you're my dad, and she hasn't woken up all day." Christopher stood up so quickly, his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "Look, kid, I think you have the wrong number. I don't have any children." A sniffle came through the line. "But Mommy showed me your picture. She said if anything bad happened, I should call you." "Who is your mother?" Christopher asked, his heart pounding unexpectedly hard. Rebecca Miller." Christopher felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Rebecca Miller. A name he hadn't heard in 8 years, a name he'd tried to forget. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. The boy gave an address in the east side of town, a part Christopher had never visited in his expensive suits and polished shoes. "Don't move. Don't open the door to anyone. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Christopher said, already grabbing his car keys. As he drove through the rain-soaked streets, memories flooded back. Rebecca had been a waitress at a cafe near his first office. Young, beautiful, with dreams of becoming a teacher. They'd dated for nearly a year. He'd been different then, less successful, more open-hearted. But when his career had taken off, he'd chosen ambition over love. She'd begged him to reconsider, said they needed to talk, that she had something important to tell him. But he'd walked away, convinced that nothing was more important than his future success. Now, as he pulled up to the rundown apartment building, a terrible realization dawned on him. The boy had called him Daddy. Rebecca must have been pregnant when he left. The thought made him sick. The building elevator was out of order, so Christopher took the stairs 2 at a time to the 4th floor. Standing outside apartment 4C, he hesitated, then knocked. The door creaked open slowly, and Christopher found himself staring into a pair of familiar brown eyes, his own eyes, but in the face of a small boy, maybe 7 years old. "Are you really my daddy?" the boy whispered, hope and fear mixing in his voice. Christopher couldn't speak. Behind the boy stood a little girl, no more than 4, with Rebecca's blonde curls and pale face. Both children looked thin, with hollow cheeks and clothes that hung loosely on their small frames. "Yes," Christopher finally managed. "I think I am." The boy opened the door wider, and Christopher stepped inside. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. A few toys were scattered on the worn carpet, and dishes were piled in the tiny kitchen sink. But what caught Christopher's attention was the figure lying on a mattress in the corner of the main room. Rebecca. He approached slowly, as if in a dream. She looked so different from the vibrant young woman he remembered. Her face was thin and pale, dark circles under her closed eyes. Her breathing seemed shallow. "She's been sick," Max explained, standing close to Christopher. "She keeps coughing and couldn't get out of bed today. She told me where her phone was and said to call you if she didn't wake up." The little girl came, closer, and tugged on Christopher's expensive coat. "I'm hungry," she said softly. Christopher knelt down to her level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she replied, her blue eyes, Rebecca's eyes, studying him curiously. Christopher swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "When did you both eat last?" Max shrugged. "Yesterday morning. Mommy made toast, but then she got too sick." Christopher pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance for your mom, okay? And then we'll get you both some food." While he made the call, Christopher couldn't stop looking at the children. His children. How had he not known? How had he lived the last 8 years oblivious to their existence? The paramedics arrived quickly, asking questions Christopher couldn't answer as they assessed Rebecca. "Pneumonia, most likely," one of them said. "Her fever's very high. We need to get her to the hospital right away." As they prepared to take Rebecca away, her eyes fluttered open. When she saw Christopher standing there, confusion crossed her face, then recognition. "Chris," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here, Rebecca," he said, moving to her side. "Max called me. Why didn't you ever tell me?" A tear slipped down her cheek. "I tried. That last day. You wouldn't listen. Then you changed your number, moved offices. I couldn't find you." The paramedics interrupted, saying they needed to go. Christopher promised Rebecca he would take care of the children, and she nodded weakly before being wheeled away. Left alone. With Max and Lily, Christopher felt terrified and completely out of his depth. These were his children, yet they were strangers to him. "Are you hungry?" he asked, and they both nodded eagerly. While he ordered pizza delivery, Christopher looked around the apartment. Bills were stacked on a small table, many marked "Final." Notice in red. A nurse's aide uniform hung on a hook by the door, and textbooks were piled on a small desk. Rebecca had become a nurse's aide instead of a teacher, he realized, trying to support 2 children on her own. The pizza arrived, and Christopher watched in silence as the children ate ravenously. His mind was spinning with questions, revelations, and a deep sense of shame. He had abandoned them, unknowingly, yes, but abandoned them nonetheless. While he had been collecting sports cars and expensive watches, his own children had been going hungry. "Do you have to go back to your house now?" Max asked, wiping pizza sauce from his mouth. Christopher looked at the boy, his son, and felt something shift inside him. "No," he said firmly. "I'm staying right here with you both until your mom gets better." Max's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Christopher confirmed. "And tomorrow, we'll go shopping for food and anything else you need." Lily climbed onto his lap, surprising him. She rested her head against his chest trustingly. "Are you going to be our daddy now?" she asked softly. Christopher wrapped his arms around her tiny body, tears burning his eyes. "I already am your daddy," he said, his voice breaking. "I just didn't know it until today." That night, after bathing the children and tucking them into their beds, Christopher sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. His phone had been buzzing with messages from colleagues about the deal he'd closed earlier, but none of that seemed important anymore. On the refrigerator, held by magnets, were drawings signed by Max and Lily, school papers with gold stars, and a photograph, faded and crinkled, of him and Rebecca from years ago, both smiling, his arm around her shoulders. Christopher stared at the photo, at the man he used to be, before ambition had hardened his heart. He'd spent 8 years building wealth, believing he had no family, no one who truly needed him. But now, sitting in that cold, dimly lit apartment, he realized he had been wrong. He had been blind to what truly mattered, and he silently vowed that he would never leave them again. The next morning, Christopher woke early on the lumpy couch. For a moment, he was disoriented, used to his king-sized bed and blackout curtains. Then he remembered everything: the phone call, the children, his children, and Rebecca in the hospital. He checked on Max and Lily, finding them still asleep, then called the hospital for an update on Rebecca. She was stable, but would need to remain hospitalized for at least a week. As he hung up, he noticed Max watching him from the bedroom doorway. "Is Mommy okay?" he asked, his voice small and worried. Christopher nodded. "She's going to be fine. She needs to stay in the hospital for a while to get better." "Who's going to take care of us?" Fear flickered across the boy's face. Christopher walked over and knelt in front of his son. "I am," he said firmly. I'm your father and I'm not going anywhere. Max studied him for a long moment. Mommy said you're a very important businessman. I am, Christopher admitted, but nothing's more important than you and Lily. Later that morning, after a breakfast of the few remaining items in the pantry, Christopher took the children shopping. As they walked through the grocery store, Lily sitting in the cart and Max helping to choose items, Christopher couldn't help but notice how everyone else seemed to know what they were doing. Other parents moved with confidence, knowing their children's preferences, while he had to ask Max which cereal they liked, what snacks they usually had. Mommy doesn't buy those, Max said when Christopher reached for some expensive cookies. She says they cost too much. The comment hit Christopher hard. He had never once in his adult life worried about the cost of groceries. But Rebecca had been struggling, counting every penny while he had lived in luxury. After filling the cart with groceries, they went to a department store for new clothes. Both children needed everything from socks to winter coats. As Lily twirled in a new purple dress, her face lit with joy, Christopher felt his heart expand. How had he lived so long without knowing this feeling? When they returned to the apartment, Christopher's phone rang. It was his assistant. "Mr. Bennett, where are you?" "You've missed 2 meetings, and the board is asking questions." "Mr. Reynolds, Gare's particularly upset about—" "Cancel everything," Christopher interrupted. "I'm taking a family emergency leave." "Family emergency?" Melissa sounded confused. "I wasn't aware you had family." "Neither was I," Christopher replied honestly. "But I do, and they need me right now. I'll call you in a few days." As soon as he hung up, his phone began ringing again. Colleagues, clients, his assistant calling back. Christopher turned the phone off and put it away. That afternoon, they visited Rebecca in the hospital. Seeing her lying in the hospital, bed hooked up to IVs and an oxygen monitor, made Christopher's chest tighten with guilt. How different would their lives have been if he had listened to her that day, if he had known about the pregnancy? Max and Lily climbed carefully onto the bed to hug their mother, telling her excitedly about the shopping trip and the new toys Christopher had bought them. When the children went with a nurse to get juice from the cafeteria, Christopher sat in the chair beside Rebecca's bed. "Why didn't you try harder to find me?" he asked quietly. "You could have contacted my company, my family." Rebecca turned her head to look at him, her eyes sad. "I did, Chris. I called your office dozens of times. Your secretary always said you were unavailable. I even went there once when I was 7 months pregnant with Max. Security escorted me out. I wrote letters that were returned unopened." Christopher closed his eyes, remembering how he had instructed his staff to shield him from distractions during those early career-building years. He had created a fortress around himself, never imagining who he was keeping out. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, taking her hand. "If I had known—" "Would it have made a difference?" Rebecca asked. "You were so focused on success, on making it to the top. There was no room in your life for a family." Christopher looked toward the door where Max and Lily had disappeared. "They're amazing, Rebecca. You've done an incredible job raising them," as he— Tear slid down Rebecca's cheek. "It's been so hard," she admitted. "I work double shifts, but it's never enough. The apartment— I know it's not a good place for them, but it's all I can afford. Max gets teased at school because his clothes are second-hand. Lily needs speech therapy that insurance won't cover." Her voice broke. "I never wanted to ask you for help. I was so angry at you for so long, but then I got sick and I was scared for them." Christopher squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to do this alone anymore. I'm here now and I'm not leaving. I promise." The doubt in Rebecca's eyes was clear. "How you've changed that much?" Before Christopher could answer, the children returned and the moment was gone. But as he watched Max carefully help his little sister with her juice box, Christopher knew the answer. Yes, he had changed, or rather he was changing, right before his own eyes. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, Christopher sat at Rebecca's small kitchen table with her bills spread out before him. Past due rent, medical bills, utility shut-off notices. The reality of what Rebecca had been facing hit him like a physical blow. He wrote checks for all the outstanding bills, then called his lawyer to arrange for immediate financial support for the children. Next, He contacted a real estate agent friend about finding a better apartment in a good school district, one with enough space for all of them. As Christopher worked late into the night, he periodically checked on the sleeping children. Each time he stood in the doorway longer, watching their peaceful faces, still stunned by the knowledge that they were his. In their features, he could see himself and Rebecca, their shared past made flesh. In the quiet darkness of the apartment, Christopher made a silent vow. From now on, Max and Lily would be his priority. The deals, the money, the corporate ladder, none of it meant anything compared to the two small lives that somehow had become the center of his world overnight. For the first time in years, Christopher felt truly alive. The call that had interrupted his carefully controlled life had changed everything, and he was profoundly grateful that it had. A week had passed since Christopher Bennett's life had been turned upside down by a phone call from the son he never knew he had. Rebecca was still in the hospital but improving steadily. Christopher had taken an indefinite leave from work, ignoring the increasingly urgent messages from his office. "Mr. Bennett, breakfast is ready," called Mrs. Garcia, the housekeeper he had hired to help with the children, while he sorted out their living situation. Christopher looked up from his laptop, where he had been searching for houses in good school districts. "Thank you. Are Max and Lily up yet?" "The little girl is. The boy is still sleeping." Christopher smiled. He was learning something new about his children every day. Max was not a morning person, while Lily woke with the sun, full of energy. He walked to the kitchen of the temporary apartment he had rented. It was nothing like his penthouse, smaller and less luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and in a good neighborhood. Lily sat at the table, her legs swinging, unable to reach the floor. When she saw Christopher, her face lit up. "Daddy," she called, the word still new and precious to Christopher's ears. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Did you sleep well?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Mrs. Garcia is teaching me Spanish. Is she now?" Christopher glanced at the older woman, who smiled. "She is a very smart child," Mrs. Garcia said. "She remembers everything I tell her." The doorbell rang, and Christopher frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with a tall, elegant woman in her 60s. "Mother," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Patricia Bennett looked past him into the apartment. "I had to hear about my grandchildren from your secretary, Christopher. I think that entitles me to a visit." Before Christopher could respond, Lily appeared beside him, looking curiously at the stranger. Patricia's eyes widened. She knelt down slowly, her designer suit crinkling. "Hello there. What's your name?" "I'm Lily." "I'm 4.5, the little girl declared proudly. Patricia's composure cracked and tears filled her eyes. "You look just like your daddy did at your age." Christopher watched, stunned. His mother had always been controlled, restrained in her emotions. He had never seen her cry. "Would you like to come in for breakfast?" he finally asked. Over pancakes, with Max finally awake and joining them, Patricia asked the children gentle questions about their lives, their favorite colors, their hobbies. Christopher observed silently, seeing a side of his mother he hadn't known existed. When Mrs. Garcia took the children to get dressed, Patricia turned to Christopher, her expression serious. "Why didn't you tell me?" Christopher sighed. "I just found out myself, Mother. It's been a whirlwind week. And their mother, where is she?" "In the hospital, pneumonia. She's been raising them alone all these years." Patricia's lips thinned. "Did she try to contact you?" "Yes," Christopher admitted. "I was too focused on my career to listen. I've made a terrible mistake, Mother." To his surprise, Patricia reached across the table and took his hand. "We all make mistakes, Christopher. What matters is how we fix them." She paused. "Your father would have been so proud of these children." Christopher felt a lump in his throat. His father had died 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. They had never been close, both too stubborn and career-focused. Now he would never get to meet his grandchildren. "I'm going to do right by them," Christopher promised. "I'm looking for a house where we can all live together." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Including their mother?" "Yes," Christopher said firmly. "Rebecca and I have a lot to figure out, but she's a wonderful mother. The children need both of us." "I see." Patricia's Tone was neutral, but Christopher could sense her reservation. His mother had always had definite ideas about suitable partners for her only son, and a nurse's aide from the wrong side of town wouldn't have been on the list. "You should bring them to dinner on Sunday," Patricia said as she prepared to leave. "Your Uncle James and Aunt Eleanor would love to meet them." After his mother left, Christopher took the children to visit Rebecca at the hospital. She was sitting up in bed, her color much better. "Mommy," Lily cried, climbing onto the bed for a hug. Max was more reserved, but the relief on his face was clear. "Are you coming home soon?" Rebecca hugged both children tightly. "The doctor says maybe tomorrow if my tests look good." When the children were distracted by a nurse offering them juice, Rebecca turned to Christopher. "Your lawyer called me." Christopher tensed. "I hope that's okay. I wanted to set up proper child support right away." He mentioned a trust fund for the children. "And a new house?" Rebecca's voice held a note of uncertainty. Christopher sat on the edge of the bed. "Rebecca, I've missed 8 years of their lives. I can't make up for that, but I can make sure they have everything they need from now on." Rebecca bit her lip. "And what about us? What are we to each other now, Christopher?" It was the question he had been turning over in his mind all week. "Parents," he said finally. "Partners in raising Max and Lily, and maybe friends for now." "I know I hurt you, Rebecca. I was selfish and blind. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope we can build something new, for the children's sake." Rebecca studied his face. "You've changed. Having your world turned upside down will do that to you," Christopher said with a small smile. "Finding out you're a father overnight tends to rearrange your priorities." The next day, Rebecca was discharged from the hospital. Christopher brought her to the temporary apartment, where Mrs. Garcia had prepared a welcome meal. "It's just until we find a permanent place," Christopher explained, showing Rebecca to the guest room he had prepared for her. Rebecca looked around in wonder. "This is nicer than anywhere I've ever lived." "Then you've been living in the wrong places," Christopher said gently. "You deserve better, Rebecca. Both of you and the children." That evening, after the children were in bed, Christopher and Rebecca sat in the living room, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. "I looked for you," Rebecca finally said. "After Max was born, I even hired a private investigator with money I couldn't afford to spend." Christopher winced. "I made it difficult. After our breakup, I moved to the New York office for a few years. When I came back, I had a new number, new address, everything." "Why?" Rebecca asked. "Were you running from something or just from me?" Christopher stared into his coffee. "From feelings, I think. You made me vulnerable, Rebecca. You made me care about something other than success. And that terrified me." Rebecca leaned forward. "And now, are you still terrified?" Christopher thought about Max's serious eyes, so like his own, and Lily's trusting smile. "No," he said. "Now I'm terrified of missing another day of their lives." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Rebecca grew stronger, though she still tired easily. Christopher took Max and Lily to school each morning, marveling at the simple pleasure of listening to their chatter from the back seat. He worked remotely when needed, but declined all business trips and late meetings. His colleagues were baffled by his transformation. Thomas Reynolds, a senior partner at the firm, called him personally. "Bennett, what the hell is going on? We're on track to make managing partner this year. Now you're turning down the Maxwell merger talks? That's career suicide." "I have more important priorities now, Thomas," Christopher replied calmly. "What? Those kids? Hire a nanny like everyone else does. You can't throw away everything you've built." Christopher's grip tightened on the phone. "That's exactly what I did 8 years ago, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. I won't repeat it." He hung up before Thomas could respond, then turned off his phone. He had promised to take Max to soccer practice, and nothing was more important than that. That Saturday, Christopher took Rebecca and the children to see a house he was considering buying. It was a beautiful brick colonial with a large yard in a neighborhood known for its excellent schools. "This is like a castle," Lily exclaimed, running from room to room. Max was more restrained, but his eyes widened at the sight of the backyard. "Could we get a dog?" he asked hopefully. "We'll see," Christopher replied, smiling at the boy's excitement. While the children explored the backyard with the real estate agent, Christopher led Rebecca to what would be the master suite. "This would be your room," he said. "It has its own bathroom and a sitting area. I'd take the bedroom down the hall." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "You're planning for me to live here too?" Christopher nodded. "The children need both of us, Rebecca. And you need time to recover fully, maybe go back to school if you want to. I know it's not conventional, but nothing about our situation is conventional," Rebecca finished for him. She walked to the window, which overlooked the garden. "It's a beautiful house, Christopher, but I can't help wondering where I fit. In your new life, am I the mother of your children? A roommate, a charity case?" Christopher joined her at the window. "Your family, Rebecca. Whatever else we are or become to each other, that won't change." The look she gave him was complex, grateful, cautious, and something else he couldn't quite read. That night, Christopher couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Rebecca's question. Where did she fit in his life? When he had walked away from her 8 years ago, he had been certain it was the right decision for his career. Now he wasn't sure of anything except that he wanted his children in his life, and increasingly, that he wanted Rebecca there too. Sunday dinner at Patricia Bennett's mansion was an elegant affair, even when children were involved. Max and Lily had been dressed in new outfits, and Rebecca wore a simple but lovely dress that Patricia had tactfully sent over. "You have your grandfather's eyes," Uncle James told Max over dessert. "He was a shrewd businessman, just like your father." "Want to be a doctor?" Max said seriously. "So I can help people like the doctors helped Mommy." Christopher felt a swell of pride. "That's a wonderful goal, Max." "And what about you, young lady?" Aunt Eleanor asked Lily. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "A princess," Lily declared. "Or maybe a firefighter princess." The adults laughed, and Christopher caught Rebecca's eye across the table. She was smiling, more relaxed than he had seen her in weeks. After dinner, while the children were being shown the garden by a besotted Uncle James, Patricia drew Christopher and Rebecca into the library. "I've been thinking about the children's future," she said, seating herself regally in an armchair. "Christopher tells me you were studying to be a teacher before. Circumstances changed your plans, Rebecca." Rebecca nodded cautiously. "I was. Yes. I've taken the liberty of speaking to the Dean of Education at State University. They have an excellent program that would allow you to complete your degree within 2 years, with accommodations for your family responsibilities." Rebecca's eyes widened. "That's very kind, Mrs. Bennett, but—" "Patricia, please," Christopher's mother interrupted. "And it's not kindness. Those children are Bennetts. Their mother should have every opportunity to fulfill her potential." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. "All the information is in here, including details about the scholarship I've endowed in my late husband's name. You would be the first recipient." Christopher stared at his mother in shock. This was a side of Patricia Bennett he had never seen. Rebecca took the folder with trembling hands. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Patricia replied. "Those children deserve the best mother you can be, just as they deserve the best father Christopher can be." She fixed her son with a pointed look. "Which reminds me, Christopher, your father's old study at the lake house is filled with his fishing gear. Max might enjoy learning to fish this summer." It was as close as Patricia Bennett would ever come to giving her blessing to this unconventional family arrangement. Later that week, Christopher was in his temporary office at home when his lawyer called. "The house purchase is proceeding smoothly," Alan Friedman reported. "But there's another matter we need to discuss. Your company's board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your position. Reynolds is pushing to have you removed as CEO." Christopher had been expecting this. His sudden change in priorities hadn't gone over well with the board, especially Thomas Reynolds, who had always been jealous of Christopher's rapid rise. "What are my options?" Christopher asked. "You could fight it, of course. Many of the shareholders are still loyal to you. Or you could negotiate a graceful exit. Your stock options alone would set you up comfortably for life." Christopher thanked Alan and hung up, deep in thought. For 20 years, his identity had been tied to his career. Being CEO of Bennett Financial had been his driving goal, the measure of his worth. Now faced with losing it, he was surprised to find he cared less than expected. He was interrupted by a knock at the door. Rebecca stood there, a concerned look on her face. "Bad news?" she asked. Christopher gestured for her to come in. "I'm likely to be ousted as CEO." Rebecca sat down across from him. "I'm sorry, Christopher. I know how important your work is to you." "That's just it," Christopher said slowly. "I'm not sure it is anymore. Or at least, not in the same way." He ran a hand through his hair. "For years I thought success meant making partner, then making CEO, then making more money than anyone else. But now, Rebecca prompted gently. "Now I measure success differently. Did I make it to Max's soccer game? Did I hear about Lily's day at preschool? Did I help with homework and bath time?" He looked at Rebecca. "Did I help build a real home for my family?" Rebecca's eyes softened. "You're becoming a wonderful father, Christopher. Max and Lily adore you." "And you?" The question escaped before he could reconsider it. Rebecca hesitated, then answered honestly. "I'm still figuring that out. The Christopher I knew 8 years ago broke my heart. The Christopher sitting here now is someone new to me." Christopher nodded, accepting the fairness of her assessment. "I'm new to myself too," he admitted. "But I think I'm becoming who I was always meant to be." The truth of the words hit him as he spoke them. The ambitious young man who had walked away from Rebecca had been running on a path set by others. His father's expectations, society's definition of success. Now, at 45, he was finally finding his own way. "Whatever happens with the high board tomorrow," he told Rebecca, "I want you to know that my commitment to you and the children won't change. You're my priority now, all of you." Rebecca reached across the desk and squeezed his hand briefly. "Then whatever happens, you'll be okay." That night, Christopher tucked the children into bed, reading them an extra story when they pleaded for just one more. "Daddy," Max said as Christopher was turning out the light, "are we going to live in the new house soon?" "Yes, buddy, just a few more weeks." "And will you and Mommy live there forever with us?" Christopher hesitated, aware of the weight of the question. "That's the plan," he said carefully. "We're going to be a family, but you don't kiss Mommy like Joey's parents do," Max observed innocently. Out of the mouths of babes, Christopher thought wryly. "Your mom and I are still getting to know each other again," he explained. "Sometimes grown-up relationships are complicated." Max seemed to accept this answer, but as Christopher left the room, he found himself thinking about what a real future with Rebecca might look like, not just as co-parents, but as partners, as the family they might have been if he hadn't walked away 8 years ago. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. But first he had a board meeting to face and a life to rebuild, piece by precious piece. The boardroom of Bennett Financial fell silent as Christopher entered. 14 pairs of eyes watched him take his seat at the head of the table. Thomas. Reynolds, sitting directly opposite, didn't bother to hide his smug smile. "Thank you all for coming," Christopher began calmly. "I understand there are concerns about my recent absence and change in priorities." Thomas leaned forward. "It's more than concerns, Christopher. It's about the future of this company. You've been distracted, unavailable. The Maxwell merger is falling apart because you wouldn't fly to Chicago last week." Christopher nodded, acknowledging the point. "You're right. I chose to attend my son's school play instead." He looked around the table, meeting each person's gaze. "I've recently discovered I have 2 children I never knew about. Their mother has been ill, and they needed me. They still need me." Murmurs circulated around the table. Several board members exchanged glances. "While I understand your personal situation is complicated," Thomas said, not sounding understanding at all, "this company needs a CEO who puts the business first, always." "I agree," Christopher said, surprising everyone, "and that's why I've prepared this." He slid folders across the table to each board member. "This is my proposal for restructuring the executive leadership. I would step back from day-to-day operations as CEO and take the position of executive chairman. Jennifer Carson would be promoted to CEO." Jennifer, the company's brilliant CFO, looked up in surprise. "I would focus on long-term strategy and major client relationships," Christopher continued, "while Jennifer would handle daily operations." I've outlined how this would work, including compensation adjustments. The board members began flipping through the proposal. Christopher could see that many were intrigued. Jennifer was well respected and had been responsible for many of the company's successful initiatives. Thomas, however, looked furious. "This is a transparent attempt to keep control while working part-time," he snapped. "Actually," Christopher replied evenly, "it's a recognition that priorities and circumstances change. I founded this company. I've given it 20 years of my life, often at the expense of everything else. Now I'm choosing a different path, one that allows me to be both a good father and a valuable leader to this organization." The discussion that followed was intense, with questions about timing, client reactions, and the impact on the company's stock price. Christopher answered each one with the calm confidence that had made him successful in the first place. 2 hours later, Christopher walked out of the boardroom with a compromise, a 6-month trial of his proposed structure with a board review at the end of that period. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. Jennifer caught up with him in the hallway. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. Christopher smiled. "Because you're better at this job than I am now. Your priorities are here. Mine have changed." Jennifer studied him curiously. "You really have changed, haven't you? I never thought I'd see the day when Christopher Bennett put family before business." "Neither did I," he admitted. "Life has a way of surprising you." When Christopher arrived at the apartment that afternoon, he found Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table, textbooks spread around her. "You've decided to take my mother's offer?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. Rebecca nodded. "I always wanted to finish my degree. With your mother's help, I can actually do it." She looked up at him. "How was your meeting?" Christopher loosened his tie and sat opposite her. "I'm no longer CEO, at least not exactly." He explained the new arrangement as Rebecca listened attentively. "Are you okay with it?" she asked when he finished. Christopher considered the question. "Yes," he said finally. "For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm making choices rather than following a predetermined path. It's both terrifying and liberating." Rebecca smiled. "Welcome to parenthood. It's always terrifying and liberating." The conversation was interrupted by the children arriving home with Mrs. Garcia. Max burst through the door first, waving a paper. "Dad, I got an A on my math test." Christopher felt a warm glow at being called Dad. It had taken Max weeks to transition from the more formal daddy that Lily used. "That's fantastic, buddy," Christopher said, examining the test paper with appropriate reverence. "We should celebrate? Ice cream?" Lily suggested hopefully, appearing beside her brother. Christopher laughed. "Why not? Let's all go out for ice cream." As they walked to the ice cream parlor, Christopher found himself watching Rebecca with the children. She was a natural mother, patient, loving, but firm when needed. Despite her recent illness and the upheaval in their lives, she remained focused on Max and Lily's needs. "What?" Rebecca asked, noticing his gaze. "Nothing," Christopher said. "I was just thinking how lucky Max and Lily are to have you." Rebecca's expression softened. "They're lucky to have both of us now." That evening, after the children were asleep, Christopher found Rebecca on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked, joining her. "I was thinking about how much has changed in just a few weeks," she said. "A month ago, I was drowning in bills, working double shifts, terrified I'd lose the apartment. Now I'm starting classes next week, moving into a beautiful house, and my children have their father in their lives." She turned to look at him. "Sometimes, I worry I'll wake up and find it was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Christopher assured her, "though I sometimes feel the same way." He hesitated, then asked, "Are you happy, Rebecca?" She considered the question. "I'm grateful. I'm hopeful. I'm still adjusting, but yes, I think I am happy." She paused. "Are you?" "Yes," Christopher said, somewhat surprised by the certainty of his answer. "For years I measured my happiness by my success. Now I measure it by moments. Max's face when he got that A, Lily's laughter at the ice cream parlor, even my mother's unexpected supportiveness." "And what about us?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Where do we fit in all this?" The question hung between them, loaded with history and possibility. I don't know yet, Christopher admitted. I know I hurt you terribly, Rebecca. I know 8 years is a long time, and we're both different people now. But I also know that when I see you with our children, when we talked like this, he struggled to find the right words. I feel like I'm home. Rebecca's eyes glistened in the moonlight. I was so angry at you for so long. When I found out I was pregnant just weeks after you left, I wanted to hate you. You had every right to, but I couldn't, not completely. She wrapped her arms around herself. Max looks so much like you. Every day I saw your eyes, your smile, and even though I was struggling, part of me was grateful for that connection. Christopher moved closer, tentatively placing a hand on her shoulder. I missed so much, Rebecca. First steps, first words. You're here now, she said softly. That's what matters to them. Impulsively, Christopher turned her to face him. And to you? Does it matter to you? Rebecca looked up at him, vulnerability and strength mingling in her expression. Yes, it matters. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Then slowly, Christopher leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When they finally separated, Rebecca rested her forehead against his chest. We should take this slowly, for the children's sake. Agreed, Christopher said, though part of him wanted to never let her go. We have time. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The new house was purchased, renovations completed, and moving day arrived. Rebecca started her classes, thriving in the academic environment she had been denied 8 years ago. Christopher adjusted to his new role at the company, finding a surprising satisfaction in mentoring Jennifer and focusing on strategy rather than daily operations, and their relationship continued to develop, cautiously but steadily. They had agreed not to share a bedroom in the new house, to give themselves time to rebuild their relationship properly, but they spent every evening together after the children were in bed, talking for hours, rediscovering each other. The new house quickly became a home. Max had his own room for the first time, decorated with space posters and sports memorabilia. Lily's room was a little girl's dream, with a canopy bed and a window seat overlooking the garden. Christopher converted the basement into a playroom, and Rebecca transformed the sunroom into a cozy study area for her coursework. One evening in late spring, Christopher arrived home to find a strange car in the driveway. Inside, he heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. "You had no right to keep this from me," a man was shouting. "They're my niece and nephew." "They've been through enough changes already, Jack," Rebecca replied, her voice strained but firm. "I was waiting for the right time." Christopher entered the kitchen to find Rebecca facing a younger man with the same blonde hair and blue eyes as hers. Her brother, Jack Miller, whom Christopher had met briefly during their relationship years ago. "You," Jack said, his eyes narrowing, as he spotted Christopher. "The big shot who knocked up my sister and disappeared. Now you're playing happy families like nothing happened?" "Jack, stop it," Rebecca warned. "Christopher didn't know about the children until recently. And you?" Believe that? Jack laughed bitterly. Convenient excuse from a convenient billionaire who showed up just when you needed money. Christopher kept his voice calm, though anger surged through him. "I understand you're protective of your sister and the children, Jack, but this isn't helping anyone. Where were you when she was working herself to exhaustion to feed them?" Jack demanded. "Where were you when she had to choose between paying rent and buying medicine when Max had bronchitis?" Each word was like a knife to Christopher's heart, but he didn't flinch. "I wasn't there. That's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Jack turned to Rebecca. "And you're just welcoming him? With open arms, after everything you went through?" Rebecca's expression was pained. "It's complicated, Jack, but Christopher is their father and he loves them. They deserve to have him in their lives. And what happens when he gets bored of playing daddy, when the novelty wears off?" Jack's voice dropped. "What then, Becca?" Before Rebecca could answer, Max appeared in the doorway, his face anxious. "Why is everyone yelling?" The adults fell silent. Jack's expression softened as he looked at his nephew. "Hey buddy, sorry about that grown-up stuff." Max looked from Jack to Christopher, clearly unsure. Christopher moved to his son's side, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Max, this is your Uncle Jack, your mom's brother." "Hi," Max said shyly. "Do you like soccer? Dad and I play every Saturday." The simple statement, "Dad and I," seemed to take some of the wind out of Jack's sails. He looked at the boy, then at Christopher, something shifting in his expression. "Yeah, I like soccer," he said finally. "Maybe I could join you sometime." The tension in the room eased slightly. Rebecca suggested Max show Jack his room and new soccer trophies, giving the adults a chance to talk. When they were alone, Christopher turned to Rebecca. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause a rift between you and your brother," Rebecca sighed. "Jack and I have always been close. He helped me a lot after you left, especially when the children were babies. He's just protective." "He has every right to be," Christopher acknowledged. "Everything he said was true. I wasn't there when you needed me." Rebecca moved closer, placing a hand on his chest. "But you're here now. And whatever Jack thinks, I know you're here for the right reasons." Christopher covered her hand with his. "I am, for you and the children, always." The front door opened again, and Lily's voice called out, "Mommy, Grandma's here." Patricia Bennett's elegant figure appeared in the kitchen doorway, laden with shopping bags. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. I found the most beautiful summer clothes for Lily and—" She stopped, sensing the tension in the room. "Is everything all right?" Before either could answer, Jack and Max returned, followed closely by Lily, who ran straight to Patricia with excited squeals. "Grandma, did you bring presents?" "Lily," Rebecca said gently. "Manners, remember?" Patricia waved. "This away. Grandmothers are allowed to spoil their grandchildren. It's in the rule book." She turned her attention to Jack, her expression cooling slightly. "And you must be Rebecca's brother. I don't believe we've had the pleasure." Jack looked uncomfortable under Patricia's imperious gaze. "Jack Miller. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Bennett." "Patricia, please," she corrected, then turned to Christopher. "I've taken the liberty of inviting a few friends for dinner this weekend to see your new home. Nothing extravagant, just 30 or 40 people." Christopher and Rebecca exchanged alarmed glances. "Mother, we're still settling in," Christopher began. "Precisely why you need a proper housewarming," Patricia said firmly. "Don't worry, I've arranged everything. My event planner will be in touch." Jack watched this exchange with growing incredulity. When Patricia swept the children away to see the presents she'd brought, he turned to Rebecca. "So this is your life now?" he asked, gesturing around the luxurious kitchen. "Society parties and grandmothers with event planners." Rebecca sighed. "Patricia means well. She's just enthusiastic about having grandchildren." "And you're okay with all this? The fancy house, the rich lifestyle?" Jack persisted. "This isn't you, Becca." "I'm still me, Jack," Rebecca said quietly. "But my life has changed. I'm a student again, working toward my dream. My children have what they need. Security, opportunities, a relationship with their father. How can I not be okay with that?" Jack looked unconvinced, but seemed to realize he was fighting a losing battle. "Just be careful, sis. Don't forget where you come from." After Jack left, Christopher found Rebecca sitting alone on the back porch. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded slowly. "Jack will come around. He just needs time." Christopher sat beside her. "He loves you and the children. That's something we have in common." Rebecca looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you—" "Christopher, love me, I mean, not just as the mother of your children, but me." The question caught him off guard. They had been taking things slowly, rebuilding trust, focusing on the children. But in his heart, Christopher had known the answer for weeks. "Yes," he said simply. "I do. I think I loved you 8 years ago too, but I was too focused on success to recognize it. Now seeing you every day, watching you with Max and Lily, sharing this life we're building. Rebecca, I love you more than I ever thought possible." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm scared, Christopher. Everything's happening so fast. A few months ago, we weren't even in each other's lives. Now we're living together, raising our children together, and I'm feeling things I promised myself I'd never feel for you again." Christopher took her hands in his. "I know it's fast. I know there's still healing to be done, but I'm not going anywhere, Rebecca. However long it takes, I'll be here, proving every day that you can trust me, that I love you, that this family we're creating is the most important thing in my life. Rebecca studied his face, then leaned forward and kissed him softly. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. I never really stopped, even when I wanted to. The weekend arrived, and with it, Patricia's small housewarming party. The new house was transformed with flowers, catering staff and subtle lighting that highlighted its architectural features. Christopher watched with amusement as Rebecca navigated the crowd of Bennett family friends and business associates, charming everyone she met. Your mother has interesting ideas about what constitutes a few friends, Rebecca commented, when she found Christopher by the bar. He laughed. This is actually restrained for her. Be thankful she didn't hire a live orchestra. Their conversation was interrupted by Jennifer Carson, Christopher's new CEO. Beautiful home, she said, glancing around appreciatively. And these must be the famous children I've heard so much about. She smiled at Max and Lily, who had appeared at Christopher's side. Jennifer, this is Max and Lily, Christopher said proudly. Kids, this is Ms. Carson. She runs the company where I work. Max looked up at Jennifer curiously. Dad says you're smarter than he is. Jennifer laughed in surprise. Did he really? She winked at Christopher. Smart man, your dad. As the evening progressed, Christopher found himself drawn into a conversation with several board members who had attended. Thomas Reynolds was among them, still clearly unhappy about the new arrangement at the company. The quarterly numbers are concerning, Thomas said pointedly. The Maxwell deal falling through has impacted projected growth. Christopher was about to respond when Patricia joined their circle. Gentlemen, she said smoothly, I couldn't help overhearing. Perhaps you're unaware that Christopher's grandfather faced similar challenges when he temporarily withdrew from daily operations to care for my ailing mother-in-law. The men shifted uncomfortably. Patricia Bennett was a formidable figure in their social circles, and her late husband had been a legend in the business community. His solution, Patricia continued, was to redirect focus to Asian markets while stabilizing domestic operations. The company experienced its largest growth period the following year. She smiled thinly at Thomas. History often provides valuable lessons, don't you think, Mr. Reynolds? Christopher hid a smile. His mother had just masterfully reminded everyone of the Bennett family's long-standing influence, while suggesting a strategy that, coincidentally, Christopher had proposed in his last board meeting. A proposal Thomas had opposed. Later, as me. The party wound down. Christopher stood on the back terrace with Rebecca, watching their children play with Patricia's tiny dog. Your mother is a force of nature, Rebecca observed. I'm beginning to see where you get your business instincts. Christopher chuckled. She's actually mellowed with age, believe it or not. He wrapped an arm around Rebecca's waist. Thank you for putting up with all this. The party, the social obligations, my mother. Rebecca leaned into him. It's all part of the package, isn't it? Besides, seeing Patricia Bennett eviscerate that unpleasant board member while smiling was quite entertaining. That's Thomas Reynolds. He's still hoping I'll fail in my new role, so he can push me out completely. Christopher's voice was unconcerned. He doesn't realize that I'm actually happier now, more balanced. Speaking of balance, Rebecca said hesitantly, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. She turned to face him, her expression serious. I appreciate everything you've done for us, the house, the support, the opportunity to go back to school. But I need to contribute too in my own way. Rebecca, you don't have to. She placed a finger on his lips. I do. For me, I was thinking of using part of my student loan to cover some of our daily expenses. Christopher started to protest, but something in her eyes stopped him. This wasn't about money. It was about dignity, about partnership, about her identity beyond being the mother of his children. What if, he suggested carefully, we set up a joint account for household expenses? We can both contribute, proportional, to our current situations. When you're teaching full-time after graduation, we can adjust. Rebecca's face relaxed into a smile. That sounds fair, thank you for understanding. I'm learning, Christopher said honestly. I don't always get it right, but I'm trying." The sound of laughter drew their attention back to the children. Max was teaching Lily how to throw a ball for Patricia's dog, their faces alight with joy. "Look at them," Rebecca said softly. "They're happy. After everything, they're really happy." Christopher tightened his arm around her waist. "We all are." As the last guests departed and the catering staff cleaned up, Christopher found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that desperate phone call just months ago to this, a home, a family, a love rekindled against all odds. There would be challenges ahead. Thomas Reynolds and his allies at the company, Jack's lingering mistrust, the complexities of blending, their very different lives. But looking at Rebecca and their children, Christopher knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was all that mattered. Fall arrived with a blaze of color in the trees surrounding the Bennett family home. 3 months had passed since the housewarming party, and life had settled into a comfortable routine. Max was thriving in his new school, already making friends and joining the soccer team. Lily had started kindergarten, coming home each day with art projects and stories about her new friends. Rebecca was excelling in her education courses, often studying late into the night after the children were asleep. Christopher had found an unexpected satisfaction in his new role at the company, focusing on long-term strategy, while Jennifer handled daily operations. The board's 6-month review was approaching, but Christopher felt confident in the arrangement they had created. One crisp Saturday morning, Christopher was making pancakes when his phone rang. Seeing Thomas Reynolds' name on the screen, he sighed. His colleague rarely called on weekends unless there was a problem. "Thomas, what can I do for you?" Christopher answered, trying to keep the resignation from his voice. "Bennett, we have a situation," Thomas said without preamble. "The Singapore deal is falling apart. Lee is threatening to pull out entirely unless we get someone over there immediately." Christopher frowned. James Lee was a notoriously difficult but important client. "Jennifer can't handle it? She's in London until Wednesday. This can't wait." The satisfaction in Thomas's voice was poorly hidden. "I told the board you wouldn't be available on such short notice, given your family commitments." Christopher understood immediately. This was a test, one Thomas expected him to fail. Either Christopher would refuse to go, proving Thomas's point that he couldn't be counted on, or he would break his promise to the children about their weekend plans at his mother's lake house. "I'll call you back in 10 minutes, Christopher said, ending the call before Thomas could respond. Rebecca entered the kitchen, immediately noticing his expression. "What's wrong?" Christopher explained the situation. "It's a trap. Thomas is trying to prove I can't balance family and work." Rebecca considered this. "When would you need to leave?" "Today, and I'd be gone at least 3 days." Christopher ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I promised Max I'd help him with the fishing tournament at the lake house tomorrow, and Monday is Lily's kindergarten parent day." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "What if we all went?" Christopher stared at her. "To Singapore? Why not? The kids have passports from that trip we took to Canada last summer. It's a short fall break at their schools. I can bring my coursework." Rebecca smiled. "It could be an adventure." "You'd do that? Uproot everyone on a moment's notice for my work?" Rebecca came closer, placing her hands on his chest. "That's what families do, Christopher. We support each other. You've been there for every soccer game, every school event. You've never once put work before us. Now it's our turn to support your career." Christopher felt a wave of gratitude and love. "Have I told you today how amazing you are?" "Not yet," Rebecca replied with a smile. "But the day is young." 4 hours later, they were on the Bennett Company jet bound for Singapore. Max and Lily were thrilled by the unexpected adventure, especially when Patricia decided to join them, declaring that she had business interests in Asia to attend to, though Christopher suspected she mainly wanted to help with the children. "This is like a rocket ship," Lily exclaimed, bouncing in her seat as the plane took off. "It's a Gulfstream G650, actually," Patricia corrected, unable to resist a teaching moment. "Your grandfather insisted on buying it the year before he passed." Christopher watched as his mother pulled out a world map and began showing the children their route explaining about time zones and international datelines. Patricia Bennett had transformed into a doting grandmother, revealing a warmth and patience he had rarely seen in his own childhood. Beside him, Rebecca was already deep in her reading for class, her dedication to her studies unwavering even at 40,000 feet. Christopher marveled at her ability to adapt to their new life. She had embraced the Bennett family's wealth without being changed by it, remaining the grounded, loving person who had captured his heart years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked, noticing his gaze. "How lucky I am," Christopher answered honestly. 6 months ago, I thought success meant closing deals and making money. Now I know it's this, our family together facing whatever comes our way. Rebecca smiled, squeezing his hand. Even unexpected business trips to Singapore. Especially those. Upon landing in Singapore, they checked into a suite at the Marina Bay Sands Hotel. While Patricia took the children to the rooftop pool, Christopher prepared for his meeting with James Lee. Rebecca helped him review the contract issues, her practical perspective offering insights he might have missed. "You know," Christopher said as he knotted his tie, "you'd make an excellent business consultant. You see things differently than most of the MBAs I work with." Rebecca looked up from the contract. "Maybe in another life. I'm going to be a teacher, remember? Why not both? After you finish your degree, you could consult part-time. The company has an educational foundation that could use someone with your background." Rebecca considered this. "Let's see how I do with teaching first. One step at a time." The meeting with James Lee went better than Christopher had expected. The elderly businessman was surprisingly charmed when Christopher explained why his family had accompanied him to Singapore. "Family is everything, Mr. Bennett," Lee said, nodding approvingly. "A man who understands this will make better business decisions than one who does not." By the end of the day, not only was the deal back on track, but Lee had agreed to expand their partnership into new markets, a victory Thomas Reynolds couldn't possibly have anticipated. Christopher called Jennifer immediately with the good news. "Lee's signing tomorrow. We got everything we wanted, plus distribution rights in 3 additional territories." "That's fantastic," Jennifer said, sounding genuinely pleased. "This should silence the doubters on the board. Reynolds has been making noise about your divided attention all week. Let him make noise. The results speak for themselves." Christopher paused. None of this would have happened without Rebecca's insights, by the way. She spotted a cultural misunderstanding in the contract language that I would have missed. "Bring her to the next strategy meeting," Jennifer suggested. "We could use a fresh perspective." That evening, while the children excitedly recounted their adventures at the hotel pool to Christopher, his phone rang again. It was his mother. "I need to speak with you privately," Patricia said, her voice unusually serious. "Can you meet me in the hotel lobby?" Concerned, Christopher excused himself and went downstairs. He found his mother sitting in a quiet corner, her expression grave. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her. Patricia took a deep breath. "While you were in your meeting, I received a call from my private investigator." "Private investigator?" Christopher repeated, confused. "What are you talking about?" "After I met the children, I hired someone to look into Rebecca's past," Patricia admitted. "I needed to be sure about her." Christopher felt a surge of anger. "You had no right to do that, Mother. Rebecca's not some gold digger you need to investigate." "Know that now," Patricia said quickly, "but that's not why I called you down here." She hesitated. The investigator found something about Jack, Rebecca's brother. Christopher's anger gave way to curiosity. "What about him?" "He's been making inquiries about you, your finances, the company structure, even details about the children's trust funds." Patricia's voice hardened. "And he's been meeting with Thomas Reynolds." Christopher felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. "Are you sure?" Patricia nodded grimly. "They've met 3 times in the past month. My investigator photographed them together at a restaurant near your office just last week." Christopher's mind raced. Jack had been openly hostile about his relationship with Rebecca, but conspiring with Thomas. That suggested something far more troubling than brotherly concern. "Have you told Rebecca?" he asked. "No, I thought you should be the one to decide that." Christopher stood up, his jaw tight with tension. "I need to think about this. Don't say anything to anyone yet, especially not Rebecca or the children." Back in the suite, Christopher found it difficult to maintain a normal facade. Rebecca noticed immediately that something was wrong, but he deflected her questions, claiming fatigue from the meeting. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Christopher sat on the balcony of their suite, staring out at Singapore's glittering skyline. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble of suspicion, anger, and uncertainty. "Can't sleep." Rebecca's voice came from behind him. She joined him on the balcony, wrapping a robe around her pajamas against the night air. "Just jet lag," Christopher lied. Rebecca studied his face. "No, it's something else. You've been distant since you met with your mother. Did something happen?" Christopher hesitated. Their relationship was built on trust and honesty. But how could he tell her what his mother had discovered without seeming to accuse her brother? Rebecca placed a hand on his arm. "Whatever it is, we can face it together. Isn't that what we just proved today?" Christopher took a deep breath. "My mother hired a private investigator." Rebecca's eyes widened. "To investigate me?" "Initially, yes, I'm sorry about that. I didn't know until today." Christopher took her hands in his. "But that's not what she wanted to tell me. The investigator found out that Jack has been meeting with Thomas Reynolds, my colleague who's been trying to push me out of the company." Rebecca withdrew her hands, her expression shocked. "Jack wouldn't do that. There must be some mistake." "I hope so," Christopher said gently. "But they've met multiple times, and Jack's been asking questions about our finances, the children's trust funds, even the company structure." "No," Rebecca stood up abruptly. "I know my brother. He's protective, yes. Suspicious of you, yes, but he wouldn't go behind my back like this." "Rebecca, I need to call him." Rebecca reached for her phone. "Right now." Christopher didn't try to stop her. He watched as she paced the balcony, waiting for Jack to answer. When he finally did, she put the call on speaker. "Becca, do you know what time it is here?" Jack's voice was groggy. "Have you been meeting with Thomas Reynolds?" Rebecca demanded without preamble. There was a long pause. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter. Is it true?" Another pause. "Yes, but it's not what you think." "Then what is it, Jack?" Rebecca's voice trembled. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're conspiring with Christopher's business rival." "I was trying to protect you." Jack's voice rose defensively. "This guy walks back into your life with his millions and his perfect house, and suddenly you're all one big happy family. I needed to make sure he wasn't hiding anything, that his intentions were genuine. So you went behind my back to his business enemy? How does that protect me?" "Reynolds approached me," Jack admitted. "He said he had concerns about Bennett's commitment to the company, that he might be using you and the kids for some kind of image rehabilitation. He suggested we compare notes." Christopher couldn't stay silent any longer. "And you believed him? A man you'd never met before who clearly has his own agenda." "I didn't know what to believe," Jack shot back. "All I know is that my sister struggled for 8 years while you lived in luxury, and then suddenly you're father of the year. It seemed too good to be true." Rebecca's face had gone pale. "You should have come to me, Jack. If you had concerns, you should have talked to me. Would you have listened? You were already starry-eyed about your new life." "I'm hanging up now," Rebecca said, her voice ice-cold. "When I'm ready to talk to you again, I'll call." She ended the call and stood motionless, staring at the phone in her hand. Christopher approached cautiously. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No," Rebecca interrupted. "You were right to tell me." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I just can't believe he would do this. Jack and I have always been so close." Christopher pulled her into his arms, feeling her body tremble against his. "He loves you, Rebecca. In his own misguided way, he thought he was protecting you by conspiring with someone who wants to hurt you." Rebecca shook her head against his chest. "That's not protection. That's betrayal. Of me, of the children, of our family." Family. The word hung in the air between them. Despite all the changes of the past months, despite moving in together and raising their children as a unit, they had never formally defined what they were to each other. "Rebecca," Christopher said softly, pulling back to look into her eyes. "I was going to wait until we got home, but I don't want to wait anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I've been carrying this around for weeks, looking for the perfect moment, but I'm starting to think there's no such thing as a perfect moment. Just perfect certainty about what matters most. Rebecca's eyes widened as Christopher sank to one knee on the balcony. I loved you 8 years ago, but I was too blinded by ambition to recognize it. I love you now. Your strength, your kindness, your fierce devotion to our children. I love the family we're building together. He opened the box, revealing a platinum ring with a single perfect diamond. Rebecca Miller, will you marry me? Will you make our family official in every way? Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes. As Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger, she laughed through her tears. This isn't exactly how I imagined getting engaged. In pajamas on a hotel balcony, right after finding out my brother is conspiring against us. Christopher stood, drawing her close. Would you prefer I tried again with a more traditional approach? Rebecca shook her head, looking down at the ring sparkling on her finger. No, this is perfectly us. Dealing with a crisis together, then finding joy in the midst of it. Their moment was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. Mommy, Daddy. They turned to find Lily standing there in her pajamas, her blonde curls tousled from sleep. What are you doing awake, sweetie? Rebecca asked, quickly wiping her tears. I had a bad dream, Lily said, her bottom lip quivering. Then she spotted the ring on her mother's finger, catching the city lights. Ooh, pretty. Is that a princess? Ring? Christopher exchanged a smile with Rebecca. Sort of. It's an engagement ring. It means Mommy and I are going to get married. Lily's eyes grew huge, like in the stories, with a white dress and flowers and cake. Exactly like that, Rebecca confirmed, kneeling to her daughter's level. Can I be a flower girl? Lily asked excitedly, her bad dream forgotten. Of course. You can, Christopher assured her, lifting her into his arms. And Max can be the ring bearer? What's happening? Max appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Mom and Dad are getting married, Lily announced importantly. Max looked from Christopher to Rebecca, his expression cautious. For real, not just living together. Rebecca held out her hand to show him the ring. For real. We're going to be an official family. Max's face broke into a wide smile. Cool. Does this mean we can get a dog now? Christopher laughed, the tension of the evening dissolving in the face of his children's innocent reactions. We'll discuss the dog situation tomorrow. Right now, everyone needs to get back to bed. As they tucked the children back in, Christopher felt a profound sense of peace, despite the revelation about Jack and Thomas. Whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together as a family. The next morning, Christopher signed the revised contract with James Lee, securing a major victory for the company. While Rebecca took the children sightseeing with Patricia, he made another important call to his lawyer. I need you to investigate Thomas Reynolds, Christopher instructed. Specifically, any communication with Jack Miller and any potential violations of company confidentiality. If Thomas had revealed proprietary information to Jack or attempted to manipulate company affairs for personal gain, he had violated his fiduciary duty to the board. Christopher didn't want to assume the worst, but he needed to be prepared. That evening, at a celebration dinner with James Lee, Christopher was surprised when the elderly businessman raised his glass in a toast. To Mr. Bennett and his beautiful family, Lee said, nodding to Rebecca, Max, and Lily. May your personal happiness continue to inform your business wisdom. Later, as they prepared to return to the hotel, Lee took Christopher aside. Your colleague, Mr. Reynolds, contacted me before your arrival. He suggested you were distracted by family matters and no longer fully committed to the company's interests. Christopher felt a surge of anger, but kept his expression neutral. And what did you think of that assessment after our meeting? Lee smiled shrewdly. I think a man who brings his family halfway around the world, rather than breaking a promise to his children, is a man who understands what truly matters. Such a man can be trusted in business because his priorities are clear. On the flight home, while the children slept and Patricia reviewed investment documents, Christopher and Rebecca discussed what to do about Jack and Thomas. "I still can't believe Jack would do this," Rebecca said, twisting her engagement ring anxiously. "We've always been so close." "Family relationships are complicated," Christopher said gently. "Look at my relationship with my mother. For years, we were practically strangers despite living in the same city. Now she's a doting grandmother who joins us on international business trips." Rebecca smiled faintly. "She's certainly not the cold society matron I expected when I first met her. People can surprise you, sometimes in good ways, sometimes not." Christopher took her hand, stilling her nervous movement. "What Jack did was wrong, but his heart was in the right place. He wanted to protect you," Rebecca sighed. "I'm still angry with him, but I don't want to lose my brother over this." "Then don't. When we get home, invite him over. Let him see our life together, how happy the children are, how happy you are." Rebecca leaned against Christopher's shoulder. "When did you get so wise about family relationships?" "Around the time a scared little boy called me Daddy for the first time," Christopher admitted. "Nothing makes you reevaluate your priorities like that." Upon their return, Christopher faced the situation with Thomas head-on. The evidence his lawyer had gathered was damning. Thomas had not only shared confidential company information with Jack, but had actively tried to sabotage Christopher's relationships with key clients. Rather than taking the evidence directly to the board, Christopher invited Thomas to his office for a private conversation. "The Singapore deal was a surprising success," Thomas said, as he took a seat, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "Lee even called me personally to rave about your commitment to family values." "Yes, it worked out well," Christopher agreed mildly, "which makes your attempts to undermine me all the more unnecessary." Thomas's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I know about your meetings with Jack Miller. I know you tried to convince James Lee that I was unfit to lead. I know you've been gathering support on the board for a vote of no confidence." Christopher placed a folder on the desk between them. "It's all here, Thomas. Emails, phone records, witness statements." Thomas's face paled slightly as he glanced at the folder. "You can't prove anything." "I don't need to. The 6-month review is next week, and the board will receive copies of everything in this folder. Unless we come to an understanding today." "What kind of understanding?" Thomas asked warily. "You resign citing a desire to pursue other opportunities. You walk away with your reputation and severance package intact. In return, this information never sees the light of day." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse, then in addition to losing your job, you'll likely face legal action for breach of fiduciary duty." Christopher leaned forward. "I don't want to destroy you, Thomas, but I will protect my family and this company from your ambition." After a tense silence, Thomas nodded stiffly. "I'll have my resignation letter on your desk tomorrow." As Thomas stood to leave, Christopher added, "One more thing. Stay away from Jack Miller. Whatever game you were playing there is over." With Thomas taken care of, Christopher turned his attention to healing the rift between Rebecca and her brother. It wasn't easy. Rebecca's hurt ran deep, and Jack remained suspicious of Christopher's intentions. But slowly, over family dinners and weekend visits, Jack began to see what Rebecca had known all along. Christopher's love for her and the children was genuine. The board's 6-month review was a formality. With the Singapore deal's success and Thomas Reynolds gone, there was no significant opposition to making the current leadership arrangement permanent. Jennifer would remain CEO, with Christopher as executive chairman, a balance that allowed him to contribute his expertise while maintaining his commitment to family life. As winter approached, wedding preparations occupied much of Rebecca's time between her classes and family responsibilities. Patricia had offered to plan the entire event, but Rebecca insisted on a simple ceremony that reflected who they truly were. "Nothing too extravagant," she told Patricia firmly. "Just family and close friends. The children should feel like they're part of it, not just observers." Patricia conceded, with surprising grace. "It's your day, dear, though I do hope you'll at least consider the country club for the reception. The gardens are lovely even in winter." On a crisp December morning, 6 months after that life-changing phone call, Christopher stood in a small chapel filled with flowers and candles. Max stood beside him, proudly holding the rings on a small pillow. Across from them, Lily waited, in her flower girl dress, practically vibrating with excitement. When the music began and Rebecca appeared at the end of the aisle, Christopher felt his heart skip. She was radiant in a simple ivory gown, her blonde hair swept up with a few curls, framing her face. Jack walked beside her. Their earlier conflict resolved enough for him to fulfill his role as brother of the bride. As Rebecca joined him at the altar, Christopher whispered, "You're beautiful." Rebecca smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "So are you." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister invited them to share their personal vows, Christopher took Rebecca's hands in his. 8 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life by walking away from you. I thought success meant climbing corporate ladders and building wealth. I was wrong. His voice grew husky with emotion. True success is this: loving you, raising our children together, building a life that matters. I promise to never lose sight of what's truly important again. I promise to be the husband you deserve and the father our children need. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. Rebecca squeezed his hands. Christopher, when you walked back into my life, I was afraid to trust you again, afraid to believe that people could truly change. But you showed me day after day what love really means, not just in words but in actions. She smiled through her tears. I promise to walk beside you through whatever life brings us. I promise to build our family with love and laughter. I promise to remind you, whenever you forget, that your true worth has nothing to do with business success and everything to do with the man you are to me and to our children. After they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, Max and Lily rushed forward to join their embrace. Christopher lifted Lily into his arms while Rebecca hugged Max close. Are we a real family now? Lily asked, her small hands patting Christopher's cheeks. We've always been a real family, Christopher told her, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. The rings and the ceremony just make it official. At the reception, held in the country club gardens as Patricia had suggested, Jack approached Christopher while Rebecca was dancing with Max. I owe you an apology, Jack said stiffly. I was wrong about you. Christopher shook his head. You were looking out for your sister and the kids. I can't fault you for that. Still, what I did with Reynolds was out of line. Jack looked over at Rebecca, who was laughing as Max attempted to twirl her. She's happy. Happier than I've seen her in years. That's all I ever wanted for her. That's all I want too, Christopher assured him. Before Jack could respond, Lily came running up to them. Uncle Jack, Daddy, Grandma says it's time for cake. Christopher smiled at his daughter's excitement. We better not keep Grandma waiting then. As they cut the cake together, Rebecca leaned close to whisper, Look at them all. Your mother, my brother, our children. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this day. Christopher followed her gaze around the room. Patricia was beaming proudly, every inch the elegant grandmother. Jack was helping Max adjust his tie, the earlier tension between them replaced by a tentative acceptance, and Lily was dancing in circles, her flower girl dress spinning around her. It all started with a phone call, Christopher said softly, her scared little boy reaching out for help. The call that changed everything, Rebecca agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. As evening fell and the reception continued around them, Christopher and Rebecca slipped outside for a moment. Alone in the garden, snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the world in white. Any regrets? Christopher asked, wrapping his arms around her. Rebecca shook her head. Not one. You? Only that we lost those 8 years. He kissed her softly. But we have the rest of our lives to make up for it. From inside came the sound of laughter. Max and Lily, no doubt entertaining the guests with their dance moves. Soon they would have to go back in, return to the celebration, continue building the life they had only just begun together. But for this moment, standing in the gentle snow with his wife in his arms, Christopher Bennett was exactly where he needed to be. The journey that had begun with a desperate phone call had led him here, to family, to love, to a life richer and more meaningful than he had ever imagined possible, and he wouldn't change a single moment of it.